You're calling 911.
Oh, give me that.
Stop.
Hey, fix your
Stop.
hair. No.
Listen, your gum, you are chewing like a cow right now. It's here.
Oh, come on. Ew.
Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this?
I swear, we did this 3 years ago. Why are we doing this again?
They look the same. We don't need new photos
really
every
don't.
year.
Aren't you like 3? Come on.
Behave for the cameraman.
Hey, good morning. I need to confess something I forgot last week to tell you. So I apologize, and hopefully when I tell you it's good news and you'll be okay with it. But a little report from Easter. Easter weekend, we had 15 people that said they wanted to follow Jesus, and so we were really excited about that. And yeah, absolutely. So we're just stoked about that. I apologize for waiting 2 weeks to tell you, but it's good news. So hopefully I didn't hurt myself too bad with that. But yeah, what a great weekend. And then last week, we started our new family series, Crazy Normal. And so we're going to continue today. But one of the things that I think of when it comes to family, one of the first things I think of actually is that it's multi-generations, right? I was privileged to know my great-grandmother. I actually got to meet her and spend time with her when I was a little boy. And both sets of grandparents lived quite a ways. I was born before my grandfather died by the time I was born, but my 3 other grandparents lived for right up until I was into my 20s, so I got to spend a lot of time with them. And of course, actually our parents on both sides, my parents and my in-laws, are both still alive, and we have kids, and we hope one day to have grandkids. And so I think for all of us, when we think about family, one of the things we think of is that there's multiple generations. It's not just us. It's not just the little tight group that we're with in the moment. There's generations involved. The other thing I think of when I think of families is the big events, right? I mean, you kind of look back, and everybody's family's composed differently. I get that, and everybody's got their own family traditions. But you go back and you kind of think about the really exciting things and the great experiences, right? The Christmases and the birthday parties and the graduations and the weddings and the births and all those things are so meaningful and so impactful. You remember those. And just because every family has them, you also remember the hard moments, right? The unfortunate moments, the things that we didn't expect when somebody loses their job or somebody passes away and we have to go to a funeral, or unfortunately even a divorce or some other kind of tragedy. We remember those. And what ultimately ends up defining our family is how we handle those things. How the generations of our family have handled the good and the bad. Because I'm convinced of this. I've met a lot of people. I'm convinced of this. Everybody wants to love their family. Right? I mean, we do. We want to love our family. And maybe the next harder thing is, not only do we want to love our family, we want to enjoy our family. And sometimes those can be difficult. And a lot of it, like I said, has to do with how we handle that generational thing and how we handle those experiences. But every family I've ever met kind of has one unwritten rule. It's something that everybody knows, and everybody kind of handles the same way. It reminds me of some of you have to go way back for this. This was 1999, and I am not endorsing the movie, but there was a great line in this movie. Fight Club from Brad Pitt. I don't know if you remember that. It was these guys that were disappointed with their lives and decided the best thing to do was start fighting each other in the basement. It was kind of dumb, actually. But there's a great line in Fight Club, and it's the first rule, so I need you to help me out. The first rule of Fight Club is... you don't talk about Fight Club, right? Yeah, that's the first rule. And it's kind of like all of our families kind of have a rule like that. That's simply you just don't talk about. And so I know about your family. I know something about your family. And I didn't stalk you, and I didn't follow you on Facebook or anything like that. But I know something about your family. No matter how your family's constructed, whether it's the traditional mom and dad and kids and raised up in the house, or maybe it's blended together a couple of families, or maybe you've got some grandparents that are raising kids, or adoption and foster, or different things. And kind of like we talked about last week, family is who you love and live with, okay? You may or may not be related to them, but that's your family. And so no matter how your family is constructed, this is true about your family. You fight. Nobody said, oh, how did they know? You fight, right? I mean, you do. We all do. Everybody does. Every family has this. I mean, you put enough people together for a long enough period of time, there's going to be misunderstandings. There's going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be miscommunications. There's going to be bad days. You're just going to have it. Every family fights. And it's really not that big of an issue anymore, is it? Like you hear about another family like, oh, yeah, that couple's having trouble. And you kind of do oh, that's too bad. Well, I'll pray for them, Or you hear about somebody else and their teenage son or teenage daughter's running off the rails. And you're kind of like, oh, that's got to be so hard. And privately you're thinking, well, I hope my kids don't do that. That'd be terrible, But I mean, we don't even notice anymore. Families fight. It doesn't even get our attention. We just kind of assume that it's true. And we really don't talk about it that much, especially within our own families, right? Because we don't need to air our dirty laundry to everybody else. We don't need to tell everybody else all the details of what's going on in our house. And so we just don't talk about it that much. It's almost like the same thing that the first rule of Family Fight Club is don't talk about Family Fight Club, right? Nobody cares, everybody's got their own issues, and we don't need to tell everybody else the bad stuff is going on in our house. We just don't talk about it. And I understand that. It makes sense. There's a problem with that, though. There's a real problem with that. Is because nobody raises an eyebrow anymore. And because we don't talk about it. And because for most of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us, we grew up in a house where they did not fight well. We did not have a good model for how you should handle family fighting. So we don't. We buy into a lie. We buy into the idea that the outcome of a family fight, the purpose of it or the goal of it, if you will, and nobody would say this out loud, but this is the way we act, is to win, right? I mean, if we're going to have a family fight and I'm going to be involved in it, then I want to win. I mean, why else would I fight if I don't want to win? And so we're deceived into thinking that the goal is, the outcome is to get my spouse to go along with me, to get my son to do what I told him to do. To get my brother-in-law to just stop, just stop it. I mean, we convince ourselves that the goal of the fight is to win the fight. And it's a huge, huge problem. You see, because when we win the fight, some really nasty things happen. You say, well, okay, then what is the goal? I mean, if you're going to fight, and there are going to be family, you said there's going to be family fights and stuff, and if we're not trying to win it, then what are we supposed to do? Well, it really comes down to one simple idea. It's not who wins the fight, but why you fight that matters most. It's not about who wins the fight. And we're going to find out in a few minutes, it's not really even about whatever it is you happen to be fighting about. It's why you fight and how you fight that matters the most. Because let me tell you what happens when you win the fight. And you know this, because you've been on both sides of it, right? You've won fights in your family, and you've lost fights in your family. And what happens when somebody wins the fight? When the fight is finally over and the dust settles and everything is calmed down, that relationship is damaged. That connection is not as strong as it was because there was a winner and there was a loser. And that relationship suffers because of that. But let me tell you, there is an option. There is another way to do this. If you choose, instead of fighting against your family, if you instead choose to fight for your family, something else happens. When you choose to fight for your family, when you fight with the right why and the right how, when the dust settles and the fight's over and the emotions have calmed down, when you fight for your family, the relationship is actually stronger than it was before the fight ever started. And so these are actually really important things because if you're fighting to win, you're fighting to damage relationships. If you're fighting for your family, you're actually strengthening relationships. And I wish it wasn't true. There is no in between. You can't kind of fight for them and to win. You either choose one or the other. You default to one direction or the other. And so this morning, we're going to kind of look at that. What does it look like to have the right motives? And how do I know? And what difference does it really make when we have these fights that we're all going to have? Because everybody has them. Even if you're living on your own as a single adult, there are still relationships that you have in your family. And there's still opportunities for fights. And those fights are either going to build a relationship or tear it down. So we have a choice to make this morning. Now, if you've got a Bible, we're going to be in the book of James. James wrote a letter to some friends. And in this letter, he pulls no punches, okay? He's very blunt, and he just tells them, hey, here's what's going on, and here's what you need to do. Because his friends were not fighting well. They were fighting to win. And so he's very adamant about this. He says, he doesn't even know what they're fighting about. And to be honest, I don't think he even cares. But he's very direct about how you fight and why you fight. He says the goal is not to get your husband on board. The goal is not to make your daughter do what you said. The goal of the fight is not to win. Now, before we get there, it's going to be in James chapter 3, verse 13, if you want to follow along or if you're in the app. You might say, well, who is James to tell us this anyway? And why should we listen to him? James has a pretty interesting story. James was the little brother of Jesus. So all of James's life, he watched Jesus. I mean, there's no pressure, right? Your older brother's Jesus, don't mess up. And so he grows up in this house watching his older brother Jesus do life. And here's something very interesting you may or may not know about James. James didn't believe in Jesus. James didn't follow Jesus. He had seen Big Brother his whole life. And when all the crowds gathered and Jesus was doing stuff and he was teaching things and everything else, James wasn't there. James opted out. Big Brother's doing his thing. I'm going to do my thing. James was not a follower of Jesus until the very end. James saw Jesus executed by the Roman government. He saw him die on a cross. He saw him buried in a cave and a stone rolled in front of it. And then 3 days later, James saw his big brother alive again. And Jesus went from being James's big brother, that maybe there were some issues there, maybe there was some sibling rivalry, whatever reason. I don't know why James wasn't interested and James wasn't a follower. But he went from a brother who was a skeptic to a follower of Jesus. Jesus was no longer his big brother, was his Lord. And so James has this incredibly unique perspective on family and what it looks like to grow up in family and how Jesus responds to the normal stuff that happens in every family. So I will give you one other heads up. It's like James has a webcam in your house, okay? It's like he's been watching you. He is so direct and so to the point, but he's so incisive and he has such great insight into relationships and how everything works. You're going to feel like he's talking directly to you. It's because he had such an incredible model growing up. And he had the opportunity to then write and say, here's what I learned watching Jesus in my family. So James chapter 3, verse 13, he's going to jump right in and he's going to talk about motives. Like I said, he knew they were fighting. And he tells them right up front, you either have good motives or bad motives. And he pulls no punches, okay? He's just going to get right to it. Look at verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds that are done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. From where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, and then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now, what is he talking about? We did kind of jump in the middle. He's talking about your motivations. He's saying you're starting from one of two places in every relationship, especially in your family, and in every fight, even more important. There are two places you can start from. And there's not three, there's not five, there's not some in-between stuff. James is very black and white. He says you're either starting from a good place or a bad place. And then he goes on to describe them. And I got to tell you, I mean, he understood family. The bad motives, you can kind of sum them up. And we're going to tear them apart here in just a second. But you can kind of sum it up. He's saying, look, if you find yourself in a fight, if you find yourself with your family in a tense situation and things aren't going well and you can kind of feel it building up in you and you know what's coming and you're kind of beginning to engage the fight already, he says you need to ask yourself, what's your motivation? He says, because if your goal is gain, your own gain, you're in trouble. When we enter a fight and the attitude is my goal is my gain, you're coming from a bad place. And he tells us what that looks like, because that's easy to say, but what does it exactly mean to come from a bad place? He says it comes from bitter envy and selfish ambition, which sound really churchy. Nobody talks like that. Nobody tells, I sense bitter envy in you. Nobody talks like that. We don't talk to each other that way. So envy and jealousy, we know what that is, right? That's when I want something that you have. And I may want it so that you can't have it, or I may just want the same thing. But envy or jealousy is in essence saying, I want what you have and I don't have it, and that bothers me. At the heart of envy and jealousy, though, is something else. At the heart of it, there's a sense of God owes me, right? God owes that to me. Now bring it into a family context. God owes it to me for my wife to support me. God kind of owes it to me for my kids to do what I ask him to do, like those other families do. You know, I've been trying to do it right. I've been trying to be a good guy. I've been trying to follow the right path. And God, it seems like you kind of owe it to me. That my wife should be more in love with me, or that my in-laws should treat me better, or that my parents should be more generous, or whatever it might be. Whenever we sense that jealousy and envy, when it comes to family, really what's at the core of it is, God, you owe us to me. We feel that sense of being owed. And here's where the bitter part comes in. When what we feel like we're owed doesn't come, we start to get bitter. And we start to get angry. And we start to blame people. And it's not long before our world starts to close in. And you know what, really? It's I've got to get mine. Because my spouse, they're not going to help me. My parents, they don't care. My brothers and sisters, they're not on my side. It's just me. I've got to take care of me, and I've got to deal with me, and I've got to make sure that I get what I want, because if I don't, man, the rest of my family, they'll just roll right over me, because all that stuff is owed to me, and it's not coming to me. And James describes this, and he says it's a dark place. It's kind of this dark, ugly shadow that gets cast over our hearts, and we convince ourselves that our selfish ambition is fine because no one else is going to help me. No one else is going to work for me. And God, you owe me this. And you can see how it just starts to spiral down, and it gets uglier and darker and darker. And then it creates fights. We fight because we feel like we're not getting what we're supposed to get. We fight because we feel like somebody owes it to us. We fight because we see other people have it and I don't. And we start fighting, and these ugly fights, we put ourselves in a position where I have to win. Because if I don't win the fight, I'm not going to get what I'm owed, and nobody else is going to help me. And you see, it's like this ugly, ugly descent, and it just goes worse and worse and worse. And you think, well, I'm not there. I mean, maybe sometimes I'm selfish. James says the source of all of this, he kind of starts to describe it. He says it's unspiritual. And then he finally says it's demonic. There are spiritual forces at work in this when we start going down this road. When we start allowing these kind of motivations. When we start summing up our life as my goal is my gain. We're in a bad spot. And we are going to fight against our family. No matter how much we love them, no matter how much we want to enjoy them, we find ourselves fighting against them. But there are some good motives too. And he said it's a much better place. He says when we come with humility, and I love this word humility because it's actually a word picture. They used it to actually describe horses, which is kind of crazy. But it's the idea of this huge, massive horse, this strong, thoroughbred horse that's completely under control by a rider. So immense power and great strength and grace and beauty, but it's controlled. It's not just running free and running wild and doing whatever it wants to do. It's controlled. It's under control. He says when we come with humility, because we all have power, we all have strength, and you might think, well, I don't, I'm not. Yes, you do. The power and the strength you have, the greatest power and strength you have is to either build up a relationship or tear it down. And he's saying when you come with that power under control, with a humility and a willingness to love peace, to consider the other person, to be willing to be second, all of a sudden, that's a different heart. That's a completely different motivation. It doesn't mean you're not going to have fights. Of course you are. It's like I said, you live in the same place or you're around these people, you love them. It's bound to happen. Difference of opinion, different attitude, different day, different things. I mean, it's going to happen. You can't get around that. But when you come with this heart fights for their family, not against their family. It fights a different way, and it has a different goal. All of a sudden, my goal is their good. It's not my gain, it's their good. There's a big, big difference. Now, he continues in chapter 4, verse 1. Look at this. And this, if you didn't think he was rough already. Verse 1, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? He's in essence saying, you're the problem, which we don't like to hear that. Verse 2, you desire, but you don't have, so you kill. You covet, but you can't get what you want. So you quarrel and you fight. You don't have because you don't ask God. And now you're ready for the big finish, right? He's going to tell you, oh, okay, so you should just pray. But when you ask, you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives. You may spend what you get on your pleasures. He kind of just blisters us again. At least I feel blistered. I mean, it's a little bit of a 2x4 over the head. I mean, he's saying you're not getting what you want, and you start to fight and you start to quarrel. And he says, and in extreme cases, you might even kill because you can't have what you want. And you're coming out of this ugly place and you don't even ask God. And then when you ask God, God says no because you ask with the wrong motives. I mean, he's really kind of pushing, but he's making a very clear statement too. I don't care what you're fighting about. I don't care where you feel that you've been wronged or you think the other person or this, that, or the other or your situation or whatever the issue is. He says you just got to fight the right way. The fights are going to come, but you have to fight the right way. And the reason that you're unhappy is because you are looking at everyone else to make you happy. But the only person that can do that is God. But when you're not willing to pursue God, You have to find it somewhere else, and you're going to have fights, and you're going to try to win those fights, and in the process, crush those relationships. And then, man, he just, like I said, he really dropped the hammer. And so you don't have it because you don't ask God, and then when you ask God, God says no. Because your motives are off. The why behind what you're doing, the why behind what you're asking for is pointed in the wrong direction. You are trying to win. Your goal is your gain. And God's never been about that. Now, I remember, hopefully this will take us to a little more positive place. I remember when I first got married. I remember our wedding day. I was so happy. I mean, it was just such an amazing day. However, only thing I remember is some lady from the church stole our cake. I don't remember a lot about the rest of the day. I don't remember what time I got there. I don't remember the songs. I don't remember everybody even at this point that was in the wedding party. I don't remember all that. But I remember being really, really happy. I remember the day of our children's birth. And I remember how amazed I was at my wife and how fantastic this gift was. And I know everybody's family is different. Everybody has a different history. And some of you have a lot longer history than I do, or some of you maybe have much, much shorter history than I do. But I remember the first day of school, and we were so happy. We were so excited. You know, we got her little outfit, and, we took some time off work, and she got her little lunchbox and the whole deal. And, we walked her to school. We're so careful. We're handing her off to somebody else. And we were so excited for her. She was looking forward to going to school. She was so happy. I remember when, their second one came along and did the same thing, and it was, you would think, oh, well, it's we've already done this before, but no, it was still important. It was still special. We were so happy. We were so focused on her having a great day, her first day at school. And I remember when we sent one on to junior high, we didn't make near as big a deal, and we weren't worried because nobody would take them. They were weird in junior high. But I still remember, even in their awkwardness and everything else, how it was, I'm a big kid now, and they were so excited about that. I remember the first day of high school. It seemed like, are you kidding me? We got a kid in high school? We're like in our 20s. How can we do that, And so we send her off to high school. We were so focused on her having a great experience. We sent one off to college. We sent the other one to high school. And you've had days like that. And there's something special about those days. Because they were about somebody else. It was about your spouse. It was about your kids. It was about your parents. Maybe it was a graduation that you went to, or an aunt or an uncle that did something amazing. And you went and you celebrated that person in your family. And you were so excited for that experience that they were having. You see, you put them first. And yet, when you look back on that moment, when you think about that experience, it brings you such happiness and joy, even though it wasn't about you. It was about them. It was about what they got to experience. It was about what they did. And it brought you such an incredible sense of happiness and joy. But sometimes, if we're not careful, much like we talked about last week, we start to look at those same people. And instead of trying to invest in them and pour into them and celebrate with them and make it about them, we can slide into making it about us. And if we're not careful, we can start looking around the family room or the bedroom or the dining room table and wonder, why aren't they making me happy? And the crazy thing about it is, they might be looking at you thinking the same thing. And we sit there looking at each other wondering, why aren't we making each other happy? And we start to fight. And we try to win the fight. We damage the relationship. It's 100% wrong. James says that's selfish ambition. Those are desires warring inside you. It's envy at work in your heart. And I know none of us want that, and none of us are signing up for that, and none of us want to end up in that place, but that's what happens. And he says that leads to the fights. And it leads specifically to us fighting against each other instead of fighting for each other. And the reason this is wrong, you got to hear this. The only thing that's going to bring you long-term happiness is putting someone else first. It's the only thing that's going to work. And I know that's counterintuitive, and you think, well, wait a minute, you don't know about me, you don't know about my wife or my husband or my kids or my parents, you don't understand. I mean, I got to find my happy. I got to figure out how to be happy, because if I don't, they're not going to. They won't invest in me like that. I'll get left by the side of the road. They'll be happy, and I'll be miserable. It's not true. It's not true. You can probably think of somebody in your life that has spent a lot of their life chasing happiness. I'm going to be happy. I don't really care about anybody else. I don't really care about anything else. I mean, they don't say that, but they live like that. I'm just in pursuit of my happiness. And guess what? They are some of the most unhappy people you ever run across. It's so ironic. The most unhappy people are the ones that are chasing happiness. And James says, I learned something from my big brother. If you will make it about somebody else, you will find yourself surprised by happiness. So how do you do this? How do you get here? Because it's one thing to tell you, hey, don't fight against your family, fight for your family. Okay, rah, 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 that's great. How do you actually put this into practice? Well, what's really at stake here is motivations and heart. So how do you change a heart? Well, the only person I know that can change a heart is Jesus. Because I've tried to change my own. I don't do a very good job at it. I've read books. I've gone to things. There's nothing wrong with that. But Jesus is the only one that's consistently changed my heart. And so that's what has to happen. When you think about your family, whatever your situation is, maybe their fights are rare and few and far between. That's fantastic. Maybe they happen all day, every day. But you can change it. And you have everything you need right now. You don't need to go to a certain class. You don't need to read a book. You don't need, I mean, those, again, like I said, those things are fine. But all you need is a humility, a strength, under control, and a willingness to ask Jesus, would you help me? So I want to challenge you to pray a very simple prayer. It's very simple. Some of you are going to hear it and you're like, oh, that's too simple. It's exactly what James said to do, by the way. You say, oh, it's just too simple. That's not it. You don't understand. But I'm just begging you, try this. Just try this. It's a very simple prayer. It says, God, help me to be selfless instead of selfish. I want to fight for my family and not against my family. You pray that prayer every day. You pray that prayer when you start to feel it boiling up, when the words are about to come out of your mouth, when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're disappointed, when you don't understand why they don't understand. If you will take the time to simply just take a breath. This is a 2-sentence prayer. It doesn't take that long. Say, Jesus, I need your help. Help me to be selfless, not selfish. Help me to fight for them, not against them. It will change your heart. And when your heart is changed and your motivation is different, the fight will go differently. You will still have the fight, but when it's over, you have the ability to build the relationship instead of feel the loss of somebody winning and somebody losing. And James is coming back and he's saying it's all about why. You're going to have the fights. Why and how are you fighting is what matters most. See, my goal for you is the same goal that I have for our family. And Donna and I have talked about this. We're getting ready to send our kids out pretty soon. They're going to be on their way, which I'm pretty excited about. But see, I want my kids to want to be around me even when they don't have to be around me. That's when I know, hey, we not only love our family, we enjoy our family. We don't have to be together, we want to be together. And specifically, they want to be around their dad, even though they don't have to be around their dad anymore. That's a huge win in my mind. That says we're winning at this idea of loving and enjoying our family. So much of it comes down to how we fight. Does the fight build the relationship or tear the relationship apart? I have a feeling you want the same thing for your family. You want to love your family. You want to enjoy your family. So I'm asking you, pray this prayer. Let your heart change. Fight differently, and you will see it happen. Let's pray together.